Jonas Vingegaard out of the Tour de France with a broken collarbone. Heartbreaking and shocking day for all cycling fans, and especially for Jonas and Visma Lease bike. There's so many things to unpack and take away from this stage. But before we go into the rest day, I want to touch on two topics: the potential role or effect of those overnight drug tests carried out on Jonas Vingegaard and Tadej Pogacar on the race and reaction time, and then also, where does Jonas's team go here without him? Going back to those drug tests that happened in the wee hours of the morning, 3 a.m. for Jonas this morning, and can that contribute to this crash that he had? And the answer is yes. I was sure I had read studies on the effects of acute sleep deprivation on reaction time decision making. And to be sure, I checked with my good friend, Dr. Scott Frey of Cerebral Performance. Scott is a cognitive neuroscientist who's devoted his whole life to studying and conducting research in these areas. And he affirmed that. He said, yes, there are good studies with moderate to large effect size that acute sleep deprivation affects reaction time, decision making, and motor control. And one of the interesting facets to these studies he pointed out as well was that these detrimental effects actually expand and compound later in the day and into the afternoon, which is when they're racing the Tour de France. So look, this is not the only thing that went into that crash. There are so many factors. There's so many turns out there, so many variables, the corners, the road furniture, the teammates, the Tour de France rides on the sequence of a million millisecond decisions over and over and over. I can't comprehend and remember how many times in my Tour de France career I went through a moment and just barely made it through and saw my life flash before my eyes, but ended up on the good side of it. And it's really unfortunate that Jonas didn't end up on the good side of this today. But it's an important question that needs to be asked. Is this acceptable? Is this right for the riders? Is it healthy? And my belief is that the answer is no. The downside and the hard thing is that the riders are also own a little bit of that, and that these riders don't have a robust, competent professional riders association that can really fight for them on matters like this. I don't know of other sports where their athletes in the peak of competition, 14 days into a 21-day event, get tested at 3 a.m. So it's frustrating, and I'll be the first one to say that I think there needs to be improvement and evolution here, but I don't know if there will be, because ultimately there really just isn't accountability here. So the moral of this story in terms of a performance standpoint is how important sleep is to performance. And revisiting these studies, talking with Dr. Fry was a reminder that yes, acute sleep deprivation and loss of sleep can have significant negative effects in our reaction time, motor control, and decision making. So the other thing I wanted to check in on was, where does Jonas's team go from here? We heard from Matteo Jorgensen after the stage today, and Matteo summed it up really well. And he actually, went back to some of what we talked about in terms of post-event reflection when I talked about some other disappointing rides that Jonas had earlier in the stage, and that there is an amount of processing time that's needed here, and he needs to sit in that and work through it. And that's what we talked about with post-event reflection, in that it's not something that needs to instantly happen or go away. We need to give ourselves time to work through this. Unfortunately, the riders have a rest day tomorrow. Matteo also mentioned literally that he said this is all mental. It is all mental now, in terms of how we get back and how we motivate ourselves and how we refocus and how we move on from here. And he's absolutely right. This is all mental, and there's a ton of mental skills that are going to go into this recovery, this reset, this reflection, and this rebound that Visma Lease bike will have to do. I want to touch on one element of this that really sits kind of low in the roots in this tree of performance excellence. And that is in regards to our identity and who we are. And Brad Stulberg, another shout out to another expert in the field, Brad Stulberg, local author, a Nashville friend of mine, recently published a book called The Way of Excellence. Way of Excellence, he refers to identity as your identity house, and the importance to have multiple rooms and facets of your identity. And the having multiple rooms and spending time in those rooms and giving attention to them creates a robustness and ultimately a resilience that allows us to really persevere through adversity. And that is a great example of one of the many factors and qualities that riders like Matteo Jorgensen, Visma Lease bike will lean on in tough times like this. Look, like Matteo said, they had no plan B. Their whole tour was riding on Jonas, and they invested so much into it. He mentioned all the time spending the whole year living on mountains, weighing their food at the altitude camps, time away from family, just steadfast pursuit and commitment for this one common goal. And it all evaporates in one split second. This can be devastating and near catastrophic, especially so if identity is fully wrapped up in the pursuit, in the outcome, and in the sport. So it's a reminder to us that it is important to revisit layers of identity, layers of self, and spend time investing into those. And, the little bit we know about Matteo, we know that this guy actually does have a broad, diverse identity. He's an interesting guy with a lot of different hobbies, pastimes, pursuits. I love seeing him out on the ski-mo tracks and in the backcountry skiing in the winter. And yeah, way more than a cyclist. And look, most of these guys are, and that is one of the many things that goes into perseverance and resilience in a really tough time like this that Visma Lease bike are experiencing now. So a lot more to unpack from today's really exciting stage. You've got to eventually touch on Remco Evenepoel and that massive ride he had in that stage win. But everyone's ready for a rest day. I am too. So we'll do more of that later. We'll talk to you then.